The old bus wheezed to a stop in front of the gleaming glass building that housed the Metropolitan Vocal Competition. Among the passengers who stepped out, Ellie Parker stood out like a dandelion in a rose garden. The 42-year-old cleaning lady from Pinewood clutched her worn canvas bag to her chest as she stared up at the intimidating structure where her unlikely dream might either soar or crash. "Last stop, Performing Arts Center," the driver called out, barely glancing at Ellie, as she thanked him with a shy smile. The morning sun bounced off the building's windows, nearly blinding her. Ellie squinted and took a deep breath of city air, so different from the pine-scented breeze back home. She had saved for 6 months to afford this trip, tucking away small bills from her cleaning jobs until she had enough for the bus ticket and one night in a budget motel. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, fingers brushing against the faded photograph tucked into her jacket pocket. Her grandmother rose in mid-song at some long-ago church gathering, mouth open in joy, eyes closed in perfect peace. The revolving doors of the art center spun constantly as people streamed in and out. Most carried instrument cases or expensive-looking portfolios. Women with perfect makeup and designer clothes clicked past on high heels. Men in tailored suits spoke loudly into phones about agents and callbacks. Ellie looked down at her best. Outfit: clean but obviously worn navy slacks, a white blouse with a small coffee stain she'd tried to bleach out, and comfortable shoes she could stand in for long hours of cleaning. Inside, the lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Contestants gathered in clusters, warming up their voices in hushed tones or comparing notes about previous competitions. Ellie approached the registration desk, where a young man with stylish glasses barely looked up from his tablet. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Ellie Parker," she replied, her voice small against the grand marble walls. The man tapped at his screen. "ID number?" Ellie fumbled in her bag, pulling out the crumpled confirmation email she'd printed at the library. "It's, CMP 447, I think." With a slight roll of his eyes, the man checked his list. "Fine. Take this number and wait in Area C. They're running about 40 minutes behind schedule." Ellie pinned the large 63 to her blouse and followed the signs to Area C, a plush waiting room where about 20 other singers sat in various states of preparation. Some were doing breathing exercises, others reviewed sheet music, and a few were simply staring into space, lips moving silently as they rehearsed. Finding an empty chair in the corner, Ellie sat down and tried to make herself smaller. Her heart pounded so hard she wondered if others could hear it. What had seemed like a brave idea back in Pinewood, entering a national singing competition after years of only singing while scrubbing floors, now felt like madness. A group of 3 women near her caught her attention. They were around, her age but looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Expertly highlighted hair, flawless makeup, outfits that probably cost more than Ellie made in 2 months. "This is my 4th time competing," said one with sleek dark hair pulled into a tight bun. "Made it to the semifinals last year. Would have gone further if Thompson hadn't been on the panel. He always favors the operatic sopranos." "Well, I studied under Madame Gertrude for 6 years, replied her friend, a willowy blonde. "She says my technique is flawless now. Just need to work on my German pronunciation for the Schubert piece." The third woman nodded sympathetically before her eyes drifted to Ellie. She nudged her friends and whispered something that made them all glance over with barely disguised curiosity. Ellie pretended to be very interested in straightening the eye. Contents of her bag. She had brought only 3 things: a bottle of water, her grandmother's photo, and a handwritten copy of the lyrics to Amazing Grace, the only song she felt confident enough to perform. "Excuse me," said the dark-haired woman, her voice artificially sweet as she approached Ellie. "Is this your first competition?" Ellie nodded, managing a small smile. "Yes, it is." "How brave," the woman replied, her friends tittering behind her. "I'm Vivian. That's Heather and Diane. We've been on the circuit for years. I'm Ellie. Nice to meet you." "So," Vivian continued, settling into the chair beside Ellie as if preparing for an entertaining story. "Where did you train?" Ellie's cheeks warmed. "I didn't, actually. My grandmother taught me some old songs when I was little. I just sing because I love it." The 3 women exchanged glances that spoke volumes. No training at all? Heather asked, eyebrows raised so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Not even community college? No, Ellie admitted. I work as a cleaner. I sing while I work sometimes. My clients, well, Mrs. Henley said I should try out. She heard me once when she came home early. A poorly concealed laugh escaped from Diane. So you're like a real-life Cinderella story? The cleaning lady with the golden voice? I guess so, Ellie said, trying to keep her dignity despite the heat spreading across her face. Though I don't expect any glass slippers. Their laughter was interrupted by a tall, imposing man who entered the waiting area. Numbers 60 through 65, please prepare. We'll begin with you in 5 minutes. Ellie's mouth went dry. Somehow she'd expected more time to calm her nerves. Vivian stood, smoothing her elegant dress. That's us. Good luck, Ellie from Pinewood. You'll need it. As the three women walked away, Ellie heard Vivian whisper, This should be entertaining, at least. Breaks up the monotony. More contestants filed into the waiting area, filling the seats around her. A young man with dreadlocks tied back in a neat ponytail sat beside her, arranging sheet music in a leather folder. First time? He asked kindly, noticing her trembling hands. Ellie nodded. Me too, he confessed with a warm smile. I'm Theo. Been singing in church choir all my life, but never anything like this. I'm Ellie, she replied, grateful for the friendly face. I sing in church too sometimes. Back row very quietly. Theo laughed. Well, no back row today. Just you and that spotlight. That's what terrifies me, Ellie admitted. You know what my grandpa always told me? The only difference between fear and excitement is how you think about it. Theo pointed to her chest. Those butterflies? They're not scared. They're dancing. Before Ellie could respond, a production assistant appeared. Number 63, you're up after the next contestant. Ellie stood on wobbly legs, clutching her grandmother's photo like a talisman. You got this, Theo whispered. Just sing like nobody's listening. The problem was everybody would be listening. Ellie followed the assistant down a long hallway, the sounds of the current contestant's powerful soprano voice echoing through the building. They stopped at a set of double doors marked Stage Access. Wait here until they call your number, the assistant instructed. Center stage has a mark. Stand on it. State your name and what you'll be performing, then wait for the lead judge to signal you to begin. Ellie nodded, though her brain felt foggy with panic. Through the small windows in the doors, she could see the current performer, a young woman in a red dress, hitting notes so high and clear that Ellie felt her confidence shrinking with each passing second. Applause erupted as the woman finished. Ellie watched her walk off stage, beaming with satisfaction as the judges scribbled notes. Number 63, called a voice over the speaker system. Ellie's feet felt like they were encased in concrete as she pushed through the doors. The stage before her seemed endless, the lights blinding. She could make out 4 shadowy figures at the rear. Judges' table and beyond them, rows of seats filled with other contestants and industry professionals. As she made her way to center stage, her plain shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor, she heard whispers and saw Vivian and her friends in the front row leaning together and smirking. In that moment, Ellie realized how out of place she truly was. A cleaning woman from nowhere who dared to dream too big. Standing on the mark, she cleared her throat. I'm Ellie Parker from Pinewood, she said, her voice barely carrying to the first row. I'll be singing Amazing Grace. One of the judges, a man with silver hair and an impatient expression, leaned forward. No accompaniment, no special arrangement? No, sir, Ellie replied. Just the song as I know it. A titter of laughter rippled through the audience. She heard someone whisper loudly, This should be quick. Ellie closed her eyes and touched the outline of her grandmother's photo in her pocket. She thought of summer evenings on the porch, of her grandmother's weathered hands clapping in time as she taught little Ellie songs passed down through generations. She remembered the peace those moments brought, how the music had carried her through years of hardship and loneliness after Gran passed. She took a deep breath, unaware that the entire auditorium had gone quiet, watching this plain woman in her simple clothes, waiting for what they assumed would be a quick embarrassment. Before the next real contestant, Ellie opened her mouth, ready to sing the first note. The lead judge raised his hand, signaling Ellie to begin. She stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of every stare in the auditorium. Vivian and her friends leaned forward in their seats, their smirks already, prepared for what they expected would be a disaster. "Whenever you're ready," the judge prompted, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. Ellie took one more deep breath. Then she opened her mouth to sing, but the sound that came out was barely a whisper. Her throat had closed up with fear. "I'm sorry," she stammered, clearing her throat. Could I start again?" The silver-haired judge glanced at his watch. The woman beside him, a famous soprano named Madame Loretta, didn't bother hiding, her eye roll. The third judge, a younger man with kind eyes, gave Ellie an encouraging nod. "One more chance," the silver-haired judge said. "We have many contestants to get through today." A snicker rippled through the front row. Vivian leaned over to whisper something to Heather, and they both covered their mouths to stifle their laughter. "The cleaning lady's choking," someone whispered, loudly enough for Ellie to hear. Heat rushed to her face. She wanted nothing more than to run off the stage, back to the bus station, back to the safety of her small life in Pinewood where no one expected anything special from her. Who was she to think she belonged here among trained professionals? Just as she was about to apologize and leave, Ellie caught sight of Theo in the audience. He was sitting up straight, giving her a thumbs up and mouthing, "You got this." Next, to him sat an elderly man who reminded her of her grandfather. Weathered face, work-worn hands resting on a walking cane. The old man's eyes met hers, and he gave her a small nod that seemed to say, "Show them who you are." Ellie closed her eyes, shutting out the judges, the fancy singers, the intimidating building. In her mind, she was back on her grandmother's porch, where the only audience was the setting sun and chirping crickets. "Amazing grace," she began, her voice barely audible. How sweet the sound. The first notes were weak, trembling like a leaf in autumn. Someone in the audience coughed, dramatically. Madame Loretta whispered something to the silver-haired judge, who nodded with a resigned expression. But then, as Ellie continued to the next line, something shifted. Her voice found its footing, growing stronger with each word. By the time she reached "that saved a wretch like me," the trembling was gone, replaced by a clear, pure tone that seemed to rise from somewhere deep within her. "I once was lost, but now am found." The whispers in the audience died away. Vivian's smirk froze on her face. The silver-haired judge stopped writing and looked up, his pen hovering above his notepad. "Was blind, but now I see." Ellie's voice soared on the last word, filling the auditorium with a sound so rich and powerful that several people in the audience straightened in their seats. It wasn't just the technical quality of her voice, though that was remarkable for someone with no training, but the raw emotion she poured into each syllable. She sang with the weight of every floor she'd scrubbed, every dream she'd deferred, every moment she'd spent believing she wasn't enough. As she moved into the second verse, Ellie opened her eyes. The stage lights no longer seemed so harsh. She could see the judges clearly now, the silver-haired man watching with raised eyebrows, Madame Loretta's mouth slightly open in surprise, the kind-eyed judge smiling broadly. "Through many dangers, toils and snares I have already come." In the front row, Vivian's friends were nudging her, their expressions of mockery transformed to shock. Theo was beaming, and the old man beside him had closed his eyes, his head swaying gently to the rhythm of Ellie's voice. For the first time since arriving at the competition, Ellie felt the tension leave her shoulders. This was why she had come, not to impress anyone, not to win anything, but to share the music that had sustained her through her hardest days. If these people with their training and their fancy clothes couldn't understand that, it was their loss, not hers. Her confidence. Growing with each note, Ellie let her voice expand to fill every corner of the hall. People who had been checking their phones or reviewing their sheet music now sat transfixed. A woman in the back wiped a tear from her eye. As Ellie approached the final verse, she noticed the door at the back of the auditorium opening. A man, in an expensive suit, slipped in quietly. Even from the stage, she could tell he was important by the way several heads turned to note his arrival. He stood at the back, listening intently, his arms crossed over his chest. When we've been there, 10,000 years bright shining as the sun. The silver-haired judge was scribbling furiously now. Madame Loretta had stopped looking at Ellie and was instead watching the man who had just entered, her expression unreadable. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. As the last note hung in the air, there was a moment of complete silence. Ellie stood still, hands clasped in front of her, suddenly aware again of her worn clothes and scuffed shoes. Then, from the back of the room, the man in the suit began to applaud. The sound seemed to break a spell, and suddenly the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Theo jumped to his feet, clapping wildly. The old man beside him wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. Even some of the other contestants, those who had been warming up or preparing their own performances, were applauding. The only ones not clapping were Vivian and her friends, who sat rigidly in their seats, exchanging glances of disbelief. The kind-eyed judge was the first to speak when the applause finally died down. "Mrs. Parker," he said, leaning into his microphone, "where did you learn to sing like that?" Ellie shrugged slightly, still overwhelmed by the response. "I didn't really learn, sir, I just sing. My grandmother taught me that song when I was little." "No formal training at all?" Madame Loretta asked, her tone suggesting she couldn't quite believe it. "No, ma'am. I clean houses for a living. I sing while I work sometimes." The silver-haired judge leaned forward. "And you've never performed professionally? Never had voice lessons?" Ellie shook her head. "Couldn't afford it, and there aren't many opportunities in Pinewood." The man in the back of the room was moving down the aisle now, approaching the judge's table. As he got closer, Ellie recognized him from posters and advertisements. Richard Wilson, the famous producer who had launched the careers of several world-renowned singers. He whispered something to the silver-haired judge, who nodded and made another note on his pad. "Well, Mrs. Parker," the judge said, "you've certainly given us something to think about. We'll be in touch with the results of this round." Ellie nodded, suddenly unsure what to do next. "Thank you," she said simply, and turned to leave the stage. As she walked off, her legs still shaky but for entirely different reasons now, she heard the whispers start up again, but they were different this time. "Did you hear that? Who is she? Where did that voice come from?" Backstage, the production assistant who had seemed so bored earlier now looked at Ellie with wide eyes. "The green room is through there," she said, pointing to a door. "Contestants can wait for the results if they want." Ellie nodded her thanks and pushed through the door. The green room was filled with other singers, many of whom looked up when she entered. A few smiled or nodded in recognition. One woman even gave her a thumbs up. Finding an empty chair in the corner, Ellie sat down, still processing what had just happened. Had she really done it? Had she actually stood on that stage and sung her heart out in front of all those people? She pulled her grandmother's photo from her pocket and looked at it, tracing the familiar face with her finger. "I did it, Gran," she whispered. "I don't know what happens next, but I did it." "Excuse me." Ellie looked up to find Theo standing in front of her, grinning from ear to ear. "That was incredible," he said, dropping into the chair beside her. "You should have seen their faces, especially those women who were laughing at you earlier." Ellie felt a blush creeping up her neck. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I almost ran off the stage." "Well, I'm glad you didn't," Theo said, "because that was the most honest performance I've heard all day. The rest of us are trying so hard to be perfect, but you just sang." Before Ellie could respond, the door opened and Richard Wilson walked in. The room immediately fell silent, all eyes turning to the famous producer. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on Ellie. With purposeful strides, he crossed to where she sat. "Mrs. Parker," he said, extending his hand, "I'd like a word with you if you don't mind." Ellie stood, suddenly aware of every eye in the room on her. "Of course," she said, her voice small again. As Richard led her toward a private corner of the room, she caught sight of Vivian and her friends entering. They stopped short when they saw Ellie with Richard, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. For the first time since arriving at the competition, Ellie allowed herself a small smile. Whatever happened next, she had already won something more valuable than any prize. She had found her voice. Richard Wilson guided Ellie to a quiet corner of the green room, away from the curious stares of the other contestants. Up close, he was less intimidating than she expected. A man in his 60s with kind wrinkles around his eyes and silver hair cut short and neat. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to a small couch. Ellie perched on the edge, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Richard settled beside her, turning slightly to face her. "Mrs. Parker," he began, "I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've heard thousands of singers, trained voices, natural talents, and everything in between." He paused, studying her face. "What I heard from you today was something rare." Ellie blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir." "Richard, please," he said with a smile. "Tell me, have you ever considered a professional career?" A small laugh escaped her. "No, never." "Who would hire someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone with an extraordinary voice and the ability to move an entire room to tears?" "I just meant." Ellie gestured, vaguely at herself, her simple clothes, her work-roughened hands. "I'm just a cleaning lady from a small town. I don't belong in this world." Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mrs. Parker, do you know how many technically perfect singers I hear every year? Dozens. Hundreds. People who hit every note precisely, who follow every rule of classical training." He waved his hand dismissively. "And do you know how many of them have what you have? Almost none." Across the room, Ellie noticed Vivian and her friends watching them, whispering furiously among themselves. Theo caught her eye and gave her an encouraging thumbs up. "What I have?" Ellie asked, turning back to Richard. "Authenticity," he said simply. "Soul. The ability to make people feel something real. You can teach technique, but you can't teach that." Before Ellie could respond, the door to the green room swung open, and the silver-haired judge entered, followed by Madame Loretta and the kind-eyed younger judge. The room fell silent as the silver-haired man cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've completed the first round of auditions. The names of those advancing to the semifinals will be posted in 30 minutes. Thank you for your patience." As the judges turned to leave, Madame Loretta spotted Richard with Ellie. She whispered something to the silver-haired judge, who frowned slightly before they both exited. Richard stood. "I should let you wait with the others. But Mrs. Parker, Ellie, I'd like to continue our conversation later, regardless of the judge's decision." He handed her a business card. "My personal number is on the back. Please call me either way." Ellie nodded, clutching the card like it might disappear. "Thank you." As Richard left, Theo bounded over, unable to contain his excitement. Was that Richard Wilson? The Richard Wilson? What did he want? "I'm not entirely sure," Ellie admitted, still dazed by the conversation. "He said I had. Authenticity." "He's right," Theo said, dropping into the seat Richard had vacated. "You're the real deal, Ellie from Pinewood." The next half hour passed in a blur. Some contestants paced nervously, others huddled in groups discussing their performances. A few sat alone with headphones, already preparing for the next round. Ellie remained in her corner, the business card warm in her hand, trying to process everything that had happened. "They're posting the list," someone called from near the door. There was an immediate rush as contestants hurried to see the results. Ellie stayed seated, suddenly afraid. What if her name wasn't there? What if the applause and Richard's interest had just been politeness, or worse, pity? Theo, who had joined the crowd, turned back to her with a wide grin. "Ellie, you made it!" She stood on shaky legs. "Really? Come see for yourself." Slowly, Ellie made her way to the board where the list had been posted. Sure enough, there was her name, Eleanor Parker, semifinalist. A mixture of joy and terror washed over her. She had come with no expectations beyond simply having the courage to try. Now she was a semi-finalist in the country's most prestigious vocal competition. As the crowd around the list thinned, Ellie became aware of someone standing beside her. It was Vivian, her perfect makeup, not quite hiding the tightness around her eyes. "Congratulations," Vivian said, the word sounding forced. "You surprised everyone." Ellie nodded. "Thank you. Did you?" "Yes, I made it too," Vivian said quickly. "Fourth time in the semifinals." She hesitated, seeming to struggle with herself before adding, "Your voice is unusual, very raw." Coming from Vivian, Ellie suspected this wasn't entirely a compliment, but she smiled anyway. "Good luck in the next round." "You too," Vivian replied, her eyes flicking to Richard's card in Ellie's hand. "Though it seems you may not need it." Before Ellie could respond, Heather appeared at Vivian's elbow. Unlike her friend, she made no attempt to hide her displeasure. "Diane didn't make it," she said to Vivian, pointedly ignoring Ellie. "First time in 3 years. She's devastated." Her gaze shifted to Ellie, cold and assessing. Interesting choices the judges made this time. The implication was clear, that somehow Ellie's advancement had come at the expense of more deserving singers. Ellie felt her earlier confidence beginning to falter. "The semifinals are tomorrow at 10 a.m., Vivian said, already turning away. "Better rest your voice." As they walked off, Ellie overheard Heather whisper, "It's just novelty. They'll realize she's out of her depth in the next round." Theo appeared at her side, scowling after the retreating women. "Don't listen to them. They're just scared because you're the real thing and they know it." "I don't know about that," Ellie said quietly. "Maybe they're right. I don't know what I'm doing here, Theo. I don't know the first thing about proper technique or breathing or any of it." "So what?" Theo countered. "You think people are crying during your performance because of your perfect breath control? They're moved because you're singing from here." He tapped her chest, right over her heart. A production assistant appeared in the doorway, clapping her hands for attention. "Semi-finalists, please gather for a brief orientation." Ellie and Theo joined the group of about 20 singers who had advanced. The assistant explained that the semi-final round would be different. Each contestant would perform with a small orchestra, and they would need to submit their song choice and any special arrangements by that evening. Panic bloomed in Ellie's chest. Orchestra? Arrangements? She had only prepared Amazing Grace, and she had sung it a cappella, the way her grandmother had taught her. As the orientation ended and contestants began to disperse, discussing their song selections and arrangement preferences, Ellie stood frozen, the reality of her situation sinking in. She knew exactly one song well enough to perform, and she had no idea how to create an orchestral arrangement. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Theo said, nudging her gently. "I don't know any other songs," Ellie admitted in a whisper. "Not well enough to perform, and I definitely don't know how to work with an orchestra." Theo's face softened with understanding. "Hey, don't panic. You can do Amazing Grace again. It's allowed. But the arrangement, I can help with that," came a new voice from behind them. They turned to find the kind-eyed judge standing there, a gentle smile on his face. "David Chen," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I couldn't help overhearing your dilemma." Ellie shook his hand, surprised. "Aren't judges supposed to keep their distance from contestants?" David laughed. "Technically, yes, but I'm also the musical director for this competition, and it's my job to make sure every finalist has what they need to perform at their best." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "Between us, Mrs. Parker, your audition was the highlight of my day. I'd hate to see you withdraw over something as fixable as an arrangement." Relief washed over Ellie. "You'd really help me?" "Consider it done," David said with a nod. "Simple, elegant, nothing that will overshadow your voice. I'll have it ready for rehearsal tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Ellie said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Just sing like you did today," David replied. "That's all the thanks I need." As David walked away, Theo grinned at her. "See? The universe wants you in this competition." Ellie laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. "Or maybe just David Chen does. Either way, you're still in the game." Theo checked his watch. I should go. My grandpa's waiting to celebrate with me, and I need to practice for tomorrow. He gave her a quick hug. You've got this, Ellie from Pinewood. See you tomorrow. Left alone, Ellie found her way back to her small corner of the green room. Most of the other contestants had cleared out, either celebrating their advancement or nursing their disappointment elsewhere. The quiet gave her a moment to think. She pulled out her grandmother's photo again, studying the joy on that weathered face. What do you think, Gran? She whispered. Am I crazy to keep going? In her mind, she could almost hear her grandmother's reply. The only crazy thing would be to waste the gift you've been given. Ellie's fingers brushed against Richard Wilson's card in her pocket. A professional career? The idea still seemed impossible. And yet, after today, perhaps impossible things could happen. With a deep breath, she gathered her few belongings and headed for the door. Her budget motel room awaited, and tomorrow would come early. Whatever happened in the semifinals, she had already done what she came to do. She had found the courage to share her voice with the world. As she stepped out of the building into the fading afternoon light, Ellie spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. The elderly man who had been sitting next to Theo during her performance. He leaned heavily on his cane, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw her. "Excuse me, miss," he called as she passed. "You're the lady who sang Amazing Grace, aren't you?" Ellie stopped, surprised. "Yes, that's me." The old man's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I just wanted to say thank you. My wife used to sing that song, been gone 5 years now." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Hearing you today, it was like hearing her again. A real gift, that was." Touched, Ellie reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me that." As she continued toward the bus stop, Ellie felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she understood that her voice wasn't just for her. It was a gift she could share, a way to touch hearts and stir memories. Whether or not she won tomorrow, that realization was worth more than any prize. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Ellie's motel room, waking her before her alarm. She lay still for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of city traffic, so different from the birdsong and occasional tractor rumble that usually greeted her days in Pinewood. Today was semifinal day. The thought sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach. Ellie reached for her grandmother's photo on the bedside table, her morning ritual since arriving in the city. "Big day, Gran," she whispered. "Hope you're watching." After a quick shower, she put on the same outfit she'd worn yesterday, her only nice clothes. She'd washed the blouse in the sink last night and hung it to dry over the shower rod. As she buttoned it, she noticed a loose thread at the cuff. In Pinewood, no one would have noticed or cared. Here, in this world of perfectly polished performers, every detail seemed to matter. With a sigh, she tucked the loose thread inside and smoothed the wrinkles as best she could. "It's about the voice, not the packaging," she reminded herself, echoing Richard Wilson's words about authenticity. The walk to the competition venue took 15 minutes, during which Ellie hummed softly to herself, warming up her voice the only way she knew how. As she approached the gleaming building, she spotted several contestants arriving in taxis, carrying garment bags and professional portfolios. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from yesterday's nervous excitement to today's intense focus. Semi-finalists clustered in small groups, some doing vocal exercises, others reviewing sheet music with furrowed brows. Ellie scanned the room for a friendly face and spotted Theo near the coffee station. "Morning, superstar," he greeted her with a grin. "Ready to wow them again?" "Trying to be," Ellie replied, accepting the cup of tea he offered. "You?" "Nervous as a cat in a dog park," Theo admitted. "But the good kind of nervous, you know. My grandpa's coming again. Says he wouldn't miss it for the world." A production assistant with a clipboard appeared before them. "Eleanor Parker? Mr. Chen is waiting for you in rehearsal room 3 for your arrangement review." Ellie nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Good luck," she whispered to Theo before following the assistant down a corridor lined with practice rooms. From behind, closed doors came the sounds of scales, vocal warm-ups, and the occasional burst of operatic power. Rehearsal room 3 was larger than Ellie expected, with a baby grand piano in one corner and chairs arranged for a small orchestra. David Chen sat at the piano, papers spread before him, while several musicians chatted quietly as they unpacked their instruments. "Mrs. Parker," David greeted her warmly, standing to shake her hand. "I hope you slept well. We've got about 30 minutes to run through your arrangement before the full dress rehearsal." Ellie glanced at the musicians, her nervousness returning. "I've never sung with an orchestra before." "Don't think of it as an orchestra," David advised. "Think of it as friends accompanying you at a gathering. They're here to support your voice, not compete with it." He guided her to a spot near the piano and handed her several sheets of music. "This is the arrangement I've prepared. Very simple, very clean. I've marked where you'll come in." Noting her worried expression as she stared at the sheet music, he added gently, "Can you read music, Mrs. Parker?" Ellie shook her head, embarrassed. "Not really. My grandmother taught me by ear." Instead of the judgment she feared, David simply nodded. "That's fine. We'll do it by ear then. Just listen to the introduction, and I'll cue you when to start. The arrangement follows your natural phrasing from yesterday." He turned to the musicians. "Let's begin, shall we? Remember, gentle support, nothing overpowering." As the small orchestra began to play, Ellie closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. David had created something beautiful. Subtle strings that swelled and receded like ocean waves, a distant French horn that added depth without distraction, and piano notes that fell like gentle raindrops around the melody. When David nodded, for her to begin, Ellie's voice joined the instruments as naturally as if she'd been performing with orchestras all her life. The arrangement left space for her voice to soar and breathe, enhancing rather than constraining her natural style. By the third verse, Ellie had forgotten to be nervous. She was simply singing, carried along by the music that surrounded her like a warm embrace. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of appreciative silence before the musicians broke into spontaneous applause. "That was lovely," said an older violinist, her eyes moist. "Absolutely lovely." David beamed with satisfaction. "I think we're ready. Any questions, Mrs. Parker?" Ellie shook her head, a little overwhelmed by the experience. "It's perfect, thank you." After finalizing a few details, Ellie made her way to the main auditorium for the dress rehearsal. The space looked different today, more intimidating, with the full lighting rig and cameras positioned throughout. A much larger audience would be watching the semifinals, including talent scouts and music industry executives. Near the stage, she spotted Vivian deep in conversation with the silver-haired judge. They both glanced her way, their expressions unreadable before they continued their discussion in lowered voices. "Don't mind them," came a voice from behind her. Ellie turned to find Heather, who looked different today. Less haughty, more human. "Vivian's father is friends with Judge Hamilton," Heather explained with a shrug. "She's always getting special attention." "I didn't know that," Ellie said, surprised both by the information and by Heather speaking to her without hostility. Heather studied her for a moment. "You really don't know anything about this world, do you?" "Not a thing," Ellie admitted. "Then how did you get Richard Wilson's personal number?" The question came out sharper than Heather perhaps intended. "He gave it to me," Ellie said simply. "I didn't ask for it." Heather seemed about to say something else when the stage manager called for all contestants to take their places for the rehearsal run-through. "Good luck," she said finally, with what appeared to be genuine feeling. "You'll need it in this snake pit." The dress rehearsal passed in a blur of technical adjustments and timing notes. Ellie watched in awe as the other semi-finalists performed, their polished techniques and confident stage presence making her feel like an amateur by comparison. Vivian's operatic performance was particularly stunning, her years of training evident in every perfect note. When Ellie's turn came, she fought against the familiar fear, reminding herself of yesterday's success. The orchestra played their introduction, David giving her an encouraging nod from the conductor's podium. She sang well, though not with the same emotional abandon as her first audition. too conscious now of technique and timing and all the things she'd never had to think about before. After rehearsal, the contestants were given a 2-hour break before the actual competition. Most headed to the green room to rest their voices and make final preparations. Ellie, feeling claustrophobic among the nervous energy, slipped outside for some fresh air. She found a small courtyard garden behind the building, empty except for a maintenance worker trimming hedges. Sitting on a bench beneath a flowering tree, Ellie closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to recapture the simple joy of singing that had carried her through yesterday. There you are. She opened her eyes to see Richard Wilson approaching, a paper bag in his hand. Mind if I join you? He asked, and at her nod sat beside her on the bench. I brought lunch, thought you might be hungry. He offered the bag, which contained sandwiches and fruit. Thank you, Ellie said, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten all day. That's very kind. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, before Richard spoke again. I saw your rehearsal. Ellie winced. Was it terrible? I felt so self-conscious. Not terrible at all, Richard assured her, but different from yesterday. Yesterday you sang like no one was watching. Today you sang like everyone was watching. The observation was so accurate that Ellie couldn't help but laugh. That's exactly how it felt. Richard turned to face her directly. Ellie, I meant what I said yesterday. You have something special, something that can't be taught, but this industry. He gestured toward the building. It has a way of polishing uniqueness until it shines like everything else. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful. Success in this world often comes at the price of what made you successful in the first place. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. After the competition today, whatever the outcome, I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. No pressure, just options. Before Ellie could respond, the maintenance worker approached, cap in hand. Excuse me, ma'am, he said shyly. I heard you singing at rehearsal. My wife cleans houses too, and she loves to sing. Would you mind? He held out a program from yesterday's performance, giving me an autograph for her. She'd be so inspired. Caught off guard, Ellie glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. She took the program and pen. What's her name? Louise, the man said, beaming. Louise Tanner. Ellie wrote a simple message and signed her name, feeling strange to be treated like someone important. The man thanked her profusely before returning to his work. Get used to that, Richard said with a smile. After today, I suspect it will happen more often. The afternoon's competition arrived all too quickly. Backstage was a flurry of last-minute preparations, singers doing vocal warm-ups, makeup touch-ups, and breathing exercises. Ellie, with nothing to adjust but her nerves, found a quiet corner to center herself. Theo found her there, looking dashing in a new suit. My grandpa bought it for me, he explained, seeing her admiring glance. Said if I'm going to sing like a professional, I should look like one too. You look very handsome, Ellie assured him. Thanks. Theo lowered his voice. Listen, whatever happens out there today, you've already won, you know that, right? You showed up, you sang your heart out, you moved people. That's what music is supposed to do. His words touched something deep in Ellie, reminding her of why she'd come in the first place. Not for fame or recognition, but because music had always been her connection to joy, to her grandmother, to something larger than her small life in Pinewood. Thank you, Theo, she said, impulsively hugging him. Good luck out there. You too, Ellie from Pinewood. Show them what real music sounds like. As the competition began and contestants were called one by one, Ellie listened from the wings, impressed by the level of talent. When Vivian performed, even Ellie had to admit she was extraordinary. Her technique flawless, her high notes crystal clear. Finally, it was Ellie's turn. As she walked onto the stage, the lights seemed less blinding than before. She could make out faces in the audience, Theo's grandfather, the elderly man from yesterday, and several of her fellow contestants who had chosen to watch from the house rather than backstage. David Chen raised his baton, and the orchestra began the gentle introduction they had rehearsed. As Ellie's cue approached, she closed her eyes briefly, summoning the feeling of singing on her grandmother's porch, of cleaning empty houses and letting her voice fill the rooms, of all the quiet moments when music had been her private joy. Then, she opened her eyes, took a breath, and began to sing. This time there was no hesitation, no self-consciousness. She sang with all the emotion and authenticity that had moved the audience yesterday, but now supported by the beautiful arrangement that carried her voice to every corner of the hall. As she reached the final verse, Ellie noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the very back row of the auditorium, a woman in a cleaner's uniform had slipped in, still wearing her work apron. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman gave her a smile of such pride and solidarity that Ellie felt her voice grow even stronger. She was singing for that woman now, for her grandmother, for Louise Tanner, whom she'd never met, for everyone who had ever had a dream they were afraid to pursue. When the final note faded and the audience rose in a standing ovation, Ellie knew that whatever came next, win or lose, she had found something precious that no one could take away from her. The sound of applause washed over her like a wave, carrying away the last of her doubts. The week after the competition passed in a whirlwind that left Ellie breathless. She had placed second overall, an achievement that still felt unreal, with Vivian taking first place. But in many ways, Ellie had won something more valuable than the competition itself. Richard Wilson had been true to his word. After the results were announced, he'd invited Ellie to his office to discuss her future. The possibilities he laid out stunned her. A recording contract, professional training if she wanted it, performances at select venues where her natural style would be appreciated. "I don't want to change you," he had insisted. "That's not what this is about. I want to give you a platform to be exactly who you are." Now, 7 days later, Ellie stood in front of the small house she cleaned every Tuesday. Mrs. Henley was waiting at the door, practically bouncing with excitement. "There she is," Mrs. Henley cried, pulling Ellie into a hug as if they were old friends rather than employer and cleaner. "Our celebrity. I knew it, I just knew it when I heard you singing that day. I told my husband that woman has a gift." Ellie smiled, still uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm hardly a celebrity, Mrs. Henley." "Nonsense. Second place in the Metropolitan Vocal Competition? Your picture in the paper? That makes you a celebrity in Pinewood." Mrs. Henley ushered her inside. "Now don't you worry about cleaning today. I just wanted to hear everything firsthand." Over tea and cookies, Ellie recounted the experience, the initial mockery, the surprise of the judges, the unexpected help from David Chen, and finally Richard's offer. "So what will you do?" Mrs. Henley asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Will you take the recording contract?" Ellie wrapped her hands around her teacup, feeling its warmth. "I'm still deciding, it's all happening so fast." "But you can't go back to cleaning houses," Mrs. Henley exclaimed, "not with a voice like yours." The words stung slightly, though Ellie knew Mrs. Henley meant well. "There's nothing wrong with cleaning houses," she said gently. "It's honest work." Mrs. Henley had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course not, dear. I didn't mean, it's just that you have such a gift. It seems a shame not to share it with the world." That evening, Ellie sat on the small porch of her rented cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her phone, a new smartphone Richard had insisted she needed, buzzed with another message. In the past week, she'd received more messages than in the previous year. Congratulations from fellow contestants, inquiries from local venues wanting her to perform, even a few reporters seeking interviews. The latest message was from Theo. "Any decision yet? The world is waiting." Ellie smiled but didn't reply immediately. Instead, she gazed at the distant hills where her grandmother's house once stood. The property had been sold years ago when medical bills ate up what little savings they had. But sometimes Ellie could still picture the old porch swing where they used to sit and sing together as day faded into night. What would Gran advise her to do now? The sound of tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. A car was coming up her long driveway, unusual for this time of evening. As it got closer, Ellie recognized Richard's silver sedan. He stepped out, looking oddly out of place in his expensive suit against the backdrop of her simple country home. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit," he called. "I was in the area for a meeting and thought I'd check in." "Of course not," Ellie replied, standing to greet him. "Would you like some iced tea?" They sat on the porch steps, glasses of tea sweating in the warm evening air. For a while, they simply enjoyed the quiet, a rarity in Richard's busy life. Ellie imagined. "It's peaceful here," he said finally. "I can see why you'd be hesitant to leave." Ellie nodded. "It's not just the place, it's knowing who I am here. In the city, at the competition, I felt like I was playing a part in someone else's story." "And now you've been offered a bigger role in that story," Richard observed. "Yes, and I'm grateful, truly. But I keep wondering if it's the right story for me." Richard set down his glass, turning to face her directly. "You know, most people in your position would have signed the contract immediately, no questions asked." "I'm not most people," Ellie said with a small smile. "No," Richard agreed. "You're not. And that's precisely why I'm here." He pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I have a different proposal for you, one I think might fit better with who you are." Curiously, Ellie took the folder and opened it. Inside were plans for a community music center to be established right here in Pinewood. "We have a foundation that supports arts education in underserved communities," Richard explained. "After meeting you, I looked into this area. There's no music program at the local school, no community arts center, nothing within 30 miles. Ellie looked up from the papers, surprised. "And you want to build one here?" "With your help," Richard nodded. "You'd be the heart of it, teaching, performing, discovering other hidden talents. We'd provide funding, resources, professional development." "But what about the recording contract? The performances?" "Still on the table, but on your terms. Record when you want, perform when you want. The music center would be your home base." Richard leaned back, watching her face. "You don't have to decide right away, just something to consider." Later that night, unable to sleep, Ellie found herself driving through town toward the old church where her grandmother had first taught her to sing. It was dark and empty at this hour, but the pastor had always told Ellie she was welcome any time. She slipped inside, the familiar smell of old hymnals and wooden pews washing over her. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the simple altar. Ellie sat in the front pew, letting memories float around her. Sunday services where Gran would nudge her to sing out louder. Christmas pageants where she'd been too shy to take a solo. The funeral where she'd somehow found the strength to sing Gran's favorite hymn while her heart was breaking. Without conscious thought, she began to sing softly, her voice filling the empty church with a melody her grandmother had loved. As the I day notes echoed around her, Ellie felt a clarity she hadn't experienced since before the competition. The next morning, she called Richard. 3 months later, on a bright autumn day, Ellie stood nervously in front of the converted storefront that now housed the Pinewood Community Music Center. A small crowd had gathered for the grand opening, local families, curious townspeople, and a few familiar faces from the competition. Theo was there with his grandfather, having driven 4 hours to support her. David Chen had come, bringing with him several music students eager to help with the launch. Even Vivian had sent flowers with a note that read, "To New Beginnings." Richard stood beside Ellie as she prepared to cut the ribbon. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Ellie shook her head. "Not one. This feels right." The center had exceeded her wildest expectations. With Richard's foundation providing funding and expertise, they had created something beautiful. A space with practice rooms, a small performance area, instruments available for those who couldn't afford them, and scholarships for lessons. Ellie would teach and perform, but also learn alongside her students. Already 30 children and 15 adults had signed up for classes, many of whom had never had the opportunity to study music before. "Before we officially open," Ellie said, addressing the crowd, "I want to thank everyone who made this possible, especially those who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Her gaze found Mrs. Henley in the crowd, who had tears in her eyes. Next to her stood Louise Tanner, the cleaner whose husband had asked for Ellie's autograph. Louise had been the first to sign up for adult voice lessons. Music changed my life, Ellie continued, not because it made me famous or successful in the traditional sense, but because it connected me to something larger than myself. That's what I hope this center will do for Pinewood: create connections, build community, and remind us all that talent and passion can be found in the most unexpected places. As she cut the ribbon to enthusiastic applause, Ellie caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the crowd, the elderly man from the competition who had thanked her for singing his late wife's favorite song. He gave her a small nod of approval that meant more than any standing ovation. Inside, the center buzzed with excitement as people explored the facilities. Children gravitated toward the instruments, tentatively plucking strings and pressing piano keys. Parents filled out registration forms while chatting with the volunteer teachers. Richard found Ellie in the small recording booth they had set up in the back. "We just got confirmation. Your first album will be released next month, just in time for the holidays." The album had been Richard's compromise. Simple recordings of the folk songs and hymns Ellie had grown up singing, produced with minimal accompaniment to preserve the authentic quality of her voice. A portion of the proceeds would support the music center. "I still can't believe any of this is happening," Ellie admitted. "Believe it," Richard said with a smile. "This is just the beginning." As the afternoon wore on, Ellie found herself surrounded by children asking her to sing something. With a laugh, she gathered them in the performance space and began a simple folk song her grandmother had taught her. Soon other voices joined in, some trained, some not, some young, some old, creating a joyful, imperfect harmony that filled the room. In that moment, watching shy children finding their voices, seeing adults rediscovering long-forgotten passions, Ellie knew she had made the right choice. Fame and fortune might have their appeal, but this connection, this sharing of joy, was why music had been given to her in the first place. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Theo approached her with a hug. "You know what I love most about this?" he asked, gesturing around the center. "What's that?" "No one will ever laugh at anyone for trying here," he said simply. "You've created a safe place for people to be brave." Ellie's eyes filled with tears as the truth of his words sank in. From mockery to meaning, from cleaning houses to changing lives, her journey had come full circle. Outside, as dusk fell, Ellie stepped onto the sidewalk for a moment of quiet. She looked up at the sign above the door. Pinewood Community Music Center, with the smaller text beneath it, "Because every voice deserves to be heard." From inside came the sound of laughter and music, a beautiful chaos of beginnings. Ellie closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you to her grandmother, whose gift had brought her here, and to those singers who had laughed at her that first day, whose mockery had pushed her to find a courage she never knew she possessed. Then she turned and walked back inside, ready to help others find their voice, just as she had found hers.